Firstly, let us remember the 3 young, innocent victims of this savage and senseless attack. B.B. King was just 6 years old, Elsie Dot Stankham was 7, and Alice da Silva Aguiar 9 years old. Their lives were cruelly cut short as they attended a Taylor Swift dance class. It should have been a time of joy, part of a precious and innocent childhood, to be cherished and remembered. And yet, the darkest of shadows fell over Southport that day as these girls were robbed of their young lives. Let us not forget that 8 more children and 2 adults were seriously injured on that day as well. Many of us in this house are parents or grandparents, and many people listening will be as well. We can only begin to imagine the pain and grief the parents and family of baby Elsie and Alice must now be feeling. And of course, we should recognise and thank the first responders who arrived on the scene. So, Mr. Speaker, we owe it to the memory of those children and to their bereaved parents to learn the lessons from this terrible incident and to take steps to make sure it doesn't happen again. And so, in that spirit, I welcome and support the inquiry announced yesterday. I asked the Home Secretary to confirm that it will be placed on a statutory footing as soon as possible to ensure its independence and also to enable it to compel disclosure of the evidence which it may need. It is vital to get to the truth about what opportunities may have existed to stop the evil perpetrator, Axel Rudakubana, from committing these sickening murders. Rudakubana was encountered multiple times, as the Home Secretary said, by the police, social services, the school system and the Prevent programme over a period of several years. The inquiry will find out, I hope, whether mistakes were made or whether the law needs to change. And the Home Secretary mentioned some areas that will rightly be looked at, and I support that. I hope the Home Secretary can also confirm this will include consideration of whether the Mental Health Act was adequate for this case. The Home Secretary has also rightly referred to Prevent. A review of Prevent was conducted by William Shawcross, and the last government responded in February 2024. Will the Home Secretary now commit to implementing all of the recommendations of the Shawcross review? Let me now turn to what happened after the murders and to the importance of openness and transparency. Firstly, and this is a very serious and important question, will the Home Secretary confirm that the inquiry will also cover the government, police and CPS response to the murders, and especially the handling of public communications and the appalling riots that followed? It's a very important question. I would be grateful if the Home Secretary would directly answer that in her response. Now, the Prime Minister this morning acknowledged that he knew about the background to the case and to Rudakubana himself, including the fact that he had been referred to Prevent on 3 separate occasions, and that Rudakubana had been found to be in possession of ricin, a highly toxic chemical, and a manual detailing al-Qaeda terrorist methods, itself an offence under the Terrorism Act. The Prime Minister also said this morning that he did not disclose any of this to the public in the days and weeks after the murders for fear of prejudicing the subsequent murder trial. And it is, of course, important for journalists and for politicians, and indeed this House, to do nothing that might prejudice a trial. But David Hall, KC, the independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, said this on the Today programme in the context of this case in October, and it bears quoting in full. Jonathan Hall said this: "The government has to be aware that if there is an information gap, then other voices, particularly on social media, will fill that gap." He went on, "If there is any information you can give, put it in the public domain, and be really careful you don't fall into the trap of saying, 'We can say zilch because there are criminal proceedings.' Quite often," he said, "there is a fair amount that can be put into the public domain." Jonathan Hall concluded by saying, "The police now realise that just saying there is a charge, we can't say any more, is not going to cut it these days." So the independent reviewer is saying that the government and police can put some material into the public domain without prejudicing subsequent trials. And in fact, on October the 29th, Rudakubana was charged with possessing the ricin and the terror manual. That was then made public. So if it can be made public in October without risking prejudice of the murder trial, it follows that it could have been made public in August without prejudicing that same trial. Background facts on other cases over the years have been made public after arrest and before trial without prejudice. And the shields relating to two of those cases are in this chamber. So why did the Prime Minister not make public some of this background information in August when he knew it, when later disclosure of that information in October demonstrated such disclosure could be made without prejudice? And why did the Deputy Prime Minister on July the 31st dismiss as, and I quote, fake news, those saying there may be further facts to come out? Let me just briefly, Mr. Speaker, before concluding, explain why this is important. As Jonathan Hall said, if there is a void, then misinformation, especially online, can fill that void. And this appears to be what happened here. And some of that information, it is said, originated overseas from hostile states. It is possible, indeed it is even likely, that this misinformation that was put into the void fuelled the totally unacceptable riots we then subsequently saw. So, will the Home Secretary accept, given what I've just said and what Jonathan Hall said, does she accept there should and could have been more openness and transparency, as I just set out, without prejudicing the trial, and that disclosing more of that truth openly and transparently would have helped combat the damaging misinformation that circulated and which arguably fuelled the riots? Will she confirm the inquiry will look at that aspect of events? Mr. Speaker, this was an appalling tragedy. Young girls murdered with their whole lives ahead of them. Let us all learn the lessons from this tragedy in honour of their memory.